Is your electric bill quietly subsidizing AI? What's going on with the data centers, regulations? Wow, we're going to dive into it on this episode. Welcome to Filibustered Live. Let's get into it right now. Well, I was pretty excited to dive into this because I've seen data centers, like even congressional or governor candidates in Florida are talking about it. We've got it going on in Georgia. It's kind of like become ground zero a little bit in the South for data centers. And so there's kind of a lot to unpack here, but I'm excited to jump into this. So I think you can share my screen. I'm going to just kind of go real quick overview, what we know about data centers and energy use. And so let's see. The first thing is, what is a data center? So let's just be real clear here. It is a large building that houses rows of computer servers, data storage systems, networking equipment, and a lot of powering and cooling systems to keep them running. And so it's essential at many companies, like people have servers and things where they need to keep backups for their company and this sorts of thing. Usually you'd see like a little room off the side of a factory that really has everything there. And then hopefully they would have that backed up off site somewhere. But that's not, we're talking about that, but much bigger. And so do you guys have any thoughts you want to start off with before we jump in here?
I do think it's a good point to make. A lot of people, we talk about these AI data centers. You can talk about it in this way. That's like, this is this brand new thing that is new and we've never had it before. And it's just not the case. We already have a lot of data centers. It's just, and also everything that you do all day long in the modern world uses data centers. If you use the internet, if you're online, even if you don't use AI, you are using data centers all the time. And so these tech companies have needed to and have expanded, data centers, for a while. But of course, as we're talking about AI and how much, power it takes to run these AI models and the chatbots and all those kinds of things, obviously they're needing to expand the amount of data centers that they have. So there's a little bit of a new, like just the sheer amount of data centers that we're probably about to see, but it's not like a new concept. It's not like this brand new, because I think people are talking about it in this way that's like, oh, these new data centers are going to be, destroying the environment and doing all this stuff. And we're going to get into like the water usage and some of that stuff in a little bit. But it's not new. It's just we're making more of them. So I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely be diving into that. Doug, any thoughts before we jump off here?
I think Reese pretty much hit the nail on the head with it. That's exactly what it is. And it's not that means that it's necessarily a good thing. It's not like we're saying, yes, use more resources, but it's just that it's interesting seeing people's arguments come out, and it's almost as though somebody told them to think this, because it's like, you realize that we've been doing this kind of thing for a long time now. Not really sure where the complaint was a few years ago, but maybe AI is just making it more apparent right now. And that's
and I do think there's some caveats, and we're going to get into those, where there are some differences that sort of upscale some of the issues or magnify some of the issues that maybe people weren't aware of before, and people getting more informed and more engaged, and people being surprised by some of these things coming up and then their energy bills changing. And so there's kind of like this hardcore for AI data centers, hardcore against. I would propose something in the middle, which I think we're going to be able to get into here. But let's dive into this a little bit. Okay. So if you think about a typical AI hyperscale center. So this would be like, it's like a mini city that basically, the size of Manhattan or whatever was one of the examples that Trump talked about. This is how much electricity how many households do you guys think an AI hyperscale center uses, equivalent of how many households annually? Just give a guess.
I would guess probably like 300,000 households. If you're talking about,
one center was 100,000 households. I'm a little shocked. You guys are apparently way more informed on this than I am. So I was shocked by that. I would have said, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000. No, it's 100,000. So
you said the size of Manhattan.
No, not that one. This is a typical AI hyperscale center. This is what this is talking about. So typical. So I guess the size of Manhattan would not be. I didn't set you up very good for that. But
okay, sorry. A typical one. That's more than I would have expected for a typical. I thought you were talking about some typical some size that we haven't built yet. But a typical
probably that would be up in the 300,000 or more.
Yeah. But my brain went to like what they're trying to do here in Texas with all the open land and like building these massive like cities of just AI data centers. And I was like, oh dang, that's going to be a lot.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, this is kind of looking at where a lot of these are. There's over 4,000 data centers already in the U.S. 4,000 of these, and that's I think there's a lot of clusters in Virginia, Texas, like you mentioned, and California. But in 2024, 4% of the total national electricity use was for AI data centers, and so that's a medium-sized country's annual demand. Medium-sized country, their annual demand for electricity is the same as what the U.S. is using for these data centers already. And so that 4% by the year 2030 is expected to double. And so do we have the capacity for that? That's a big concern. And so some people are looking at and saying, hey, these are going to be great. These states are competing for some of these because they want the construction jobs. They want the tax revenue. They think it's going to bring more economic growth. And then there's other federal policy labels on these saying that these are a national priority and that sort of thing. So it's quite interesting to see a lot of this, but I don't know. You guys have any thoughts? Do you think this is a national priority?
Yeah, well, it's what we're moving towards. And if we're going to be using up all of our land to be able to handle this, then it should be a priority, not in the sense of like that I'm saying we should be doing this, but that we need to be monitoring it and doing it the best way possible so that we don't do it in a bad way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of it comes back to, I mean, I'll save the energy talk for a little bit. I'm personally okay with it using 4% of the energy grid at the moment. Using 8% of the energy grid, we're going to have to do some fantastic investment into new kinds of energy, but that is already happening. And I think it's actually going to make energy better and cheaper in the long run, although I do believe it will probably increase energy bills initially. But I'll save my energy bit for later because I'm actually really optimistic about that side. That's what I'm most excited about. But as far as like the general question, should we be prioritizing this as as a nation and the amount of money that's going into this and all that kind of stuff? I mean, I'm more of a free market person, so I typically like, well, it's the company's money, for the most part that they're putting into it, so they can do whatever they want. But as far as AI in general, I'm a little bit of an AI skeptic. I'm a little bit of I've seen some numbers of people being like, oh, we're having like medical breakthroughs faster, research is faster. I think for a lot of really technical industries, AI is like where you find the most benefit, where they can really do like a lot of data analysis so much quicker than they've ever been able to before. And it's really helpful, and it's, allows them to, and I think you're going to see more of that, like the help coming from that in the future. I know a lot of people are worried about like it replacing people's jobs and stuff like that. And that's not something that I am excited about seeing. That would be a really rough transition if suddenly like most jobs were replaced by AI. I don't really think we're there yet. I might be naive, but I really feel like a lot of the AI stuff is kind of overblown. Like they're trying to sell it like it's smarter and it's better than it actually is. And I still think for a long time, it's probably just going to be a tool that people use, and it's not really going to replace, humans like jobs and stuff like that to the degree that some people are thinking. But I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong and completely naive, and maybe all of our jobs will be replaced in the next 5 years, like some people are saying. But right now, I really do think they're pouring so much money into it, and they need to hype it up, but it still hasn't shown itself to be like an amazing, wonderful product that's helpful for everybody, So that's my thought.
I've kind of heard, I've heard people talking about how companies are laying off all these people saying it's from AI, it's because of AI and all that, but actually they're also hiring the equivalent of H-1B visas for people coming into the U.S. to work lower level jobs. And that's a conversation happening right now in Florida with the governor race as well, saying, hey, why are we bringing in HB1 visas to take over, entry level accounting and jobs for people that are taking. And so there's kind of like this, AI is taking jobs, but at the same time, is it really? Like, what's the company really doing differently? And so definitely we need to be AI aware and use it more for augmentation. But okay.
But if Elon is right, and we really are going to have a very high universal basic income, then problem solved. That's all.
Problem solved, right? They always.
I don't trust a lot of Elon's Like he's smart and he's good at different things, right? But the hype. I don't trust the hype. The hype of like, oh, this is going to be able to lead us into like a utopia in the next 10 years where no human has to work anymore. I don't trust that hype.
No,
I really think it's completely overblown. I'd probably not. It'll probably be a very useful tool. And also, we know there's a lot of the biggest potential danger is how much easier it allows the government to become a surveillance state. That's the largest potential danger in my mind. That's the biggest, because it's so much cheaper and easier to use AI, and it will be in the future, in order to like spy on everybody all the time than it is to hire tons and tons of humans, to do so, right? And I think that's the biggest threat. As far as the benefits go, it just seems overblown that we're going to somehow get to where like nobody has to work and we're going to have universal basic income that's coming anytime soon. I'm highly doubtful of that. But
yeah, this is, to me, that is the sales pitch. That's what Elon's doing. I mean, he's bringing together all these different things that I think there's going to be a twist at some point where it's like, oh, now we're on the hook and now you're going to have to go this route. And now the government knows what you're thinking all the time. And like China uses AI in their cameras to where they've got one camera for every 2 citizens in China, every 2 people in China. And it tracks even how you walk. It tracks your eye movement, tracks everything. And it knows who you are just based on how you walk, even if you were wearing a mask over your face. And it's insane. And so they can go into your bank account, take all the stuff out, do all this stuff without you ever, before people even get into their house. And so, yeah, that's where it's going with all that. But let's talk about some of this utility rate increases. So this is a big issue with this, is saying that utility rate hikes hit $31 billion despite bipartisan backlash to rising costs. So this article goes into what it talks about, kind of all these big increases that are happening, and a lot of it's around the data centers and we're going to talk about some of the legislation that's out right now. But basically, these data centers come in and it takes all the capacity, and then it raises costs for everybody else because they can't produce the amount of energy needed, or they need to do infrastructure upgrades, or they need it's deliverability, or they're paying to have these things put in place. And so that's why we started out with asking if your electric bill is quietly subsidizing AI. And so that's kind of what's going on here. And what's come up is, we saw an article, or we saw Trump talk about, he challenged Microsoft to basically say, you need to pay your own bill if you're going to do the data center. Now, for me, I thought, well, of course, why would they not? Who's not paying their own bill? But the issue is that they get tax breaks. Okay, so there's lots of money coming in as tax breaks. I was trying to find it. Yeah. Data centers won billions in tax breaks, and some states are balking. So this is talking about how, look at all, they're paying their electric bills, but at the same time, they're getting these big tax breaks. And there's other infrastructure changes and things that are going to have to be made and happen to where everybody is going to have to be paying more. And so there's also an issue with transparency, and we'll get into some of that in some of these bills. But what do you guys think? I mean, have you guys seen this about energy costs going up, and it's sort of under the radar for people until their bill gets bigger?
Well, my first thought about just settle on the tax breaks for a little bit. I don't know where all the tax breaks are coming from, but usually with new projects like this, the tax breaks are local. They're coming from local because states and cities are trying to, especially states. I remember this when I was like, I did media stuff for a little bit of like the nonprofit and political world back in Oklahoma City. And I remember this was a big deal because Oklahoma and a bunch of other states were trying to get the next Amazon headquarters built in their state, right? And Oklahoma was putting together this big tax break, agreement basically, where they were going to be, giving Amazon all these great tax breaks and all this stuff. And the idea behind that is that the state still comes out ahead because you woo the company to come build their massive tech city in your town, in your state, which is literally what the plan was, to have like, a town called like Amazon, Oklahoma. That was going to be a new town, right? It didn't go to Oklahoma. It went to some other state. I don't remember which one. But it was after Amazon left New York City, because New York City was not giving bending over backwards for them, so to speak. Actually, they had a lot of, there's protests and all kinds of stuff happening in New York City about Amazon moving in there, but that's besides the point. And so a lot of people always get upset about that because they're like, oh my gosh, you're giving tax breaks to these massive companies that why are you giving these tax breaks to these massive companies? But that is really on your local politicians. That's not usually at the federal level. That's like your governor and your local politicians who are like, well, we think this is going to improve the economy of our state. Like, we're going to bring lots of jobs by bringing in this new industry. And they are basically footing the bill up front. Okay, I say that you are footing the bill up front by paying for their taxes, essentially. But when they give them a tax break, that just means that you're paying their taxes as opposed to the company paying their taxes initially. So I'm pretty split on that. I get why a lot of states want to do it, because to them it's like the way to beat out other states and get the data centers built there. But also, like, I don't love the idea because it's like, no, like, the companies can pay their own taxes. I pay my taxes. Why can't they pay their taxes? So.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, like, when I was in working in corporate America, we would talk with companies like suppliers that we wanted them to put a facility in the U.S. So as a global company, wanted them to put it in the U.S. And a big part of whether they're going to put it in Texas, one of them was going to put it on the border. The southern border is either going to be in Texas or in Mexico. It just depended on what was the benefits going to be, because you could technically get the same labor legally, the same labor pool. So where are you going to put it? Or is it going to be in Pennsylvania, or is it going to be in Iowa, or where's it going to be? And that's what they're talking about. It's the incentives. It's like, do they have the people there that are going to be able to fill the jobs? Is there going to be massive competition? I mean, so those are all real questions. And so, but I will say though, sometimes those tax incentives can be short-sighted, because you get them there, but if you don't have the infrastructure and the people and all that to support it, then you can cause other issues. But I'm not necessarily against the tax incentives, but what I am against is the lack of transparency, which we're going to talk about here with some of this Florida bill, with what's going on. But Microsoft is claiming the communities won't see hikes. They got a public commitment. Trump got them to make a public, at least with their mouth, a commitment of that. But there's a lot of actual details behind the scenes, under the radar, that can lead to issues in these centers or in these different cities. So let's talk about.
You have any thoughts about that, Doug? About the price hikes or anything before we move on?
Well, I'll say this much. I know that my electricity bill is going up this year, and I got a notice in the mail in December of last year telling me that was going to happen, and I was not happy about that. So all I can say is that I don't really trust any of these people, and I think that they're all a bunch of liars. So they probably still are hiding the the costs in our bills, whether or not they say it. And think about the founder of Microsoft. Yeah, he's a trustworthy person.
Right?
Yeah, I believe what he says.
I do. Yeah. I will push. I'm going to push back about that later. I have a little bit of a white pill topic later on about the energy costs, because I will say it's most likely driving up the energy costs right now, mostly because of supply and demand. There's more demand for electricity, right? But we don't have the supply, so it's going to go up, right? But I will talk about in a little bit later in the episode about what potentially could extremely expand our supply and eventually save us all money on energy. But that's my optimism coming out there. Yeah. So, but I understand it's a serious concern right now for sure.
No, it's definitely a concern. There's a lot to unpack here. One of the James Fishback, he's governor, running for governor in Florida, and he actually says he's going to cancel any contracts for AI data centers. So he's going the other end of the spectrum. And just saying we're just not going to do it, because he's, his competitor is wanting Florida to be the next New York, like basically the new AI center, the financial new AI center of the world, or whatever. Where and he's saying, he wants to go more the rural farming route. Like, let's go back to making oranges and growing oranges, and so it's quite interesting to see what everybody's talking about down here. Okay. Let's talk about specifically what Florida is doing, though. There's a bill to regulate AI data centers that's advancing in the Florida Senate. And so this is literally just like this month. And so this is a pretty good bill. I haven't gotten into all of the details of it, but basically the biggest things for me are the transparency concern is one thing, where basically saying that local governments cannot enter into non-disclosure agreements with the companies doing these things. So then it can be hidden and people don't know what's coming until all of a sudden, hey, there's a city council meeting next week. Come voice your concerns. It's like
and we're going to ignore them promptly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's a big issue that, it's a short notice. So there's less people to ignore, at that point. But so basically making disclosing information to the public a necessity. And so that it can be done correctly. There are some things where there's like public records exemptions. And like, I understand you can get into some nuances to where it's like, oh, we don't want our competitors know what we're doing. So yeah, we need this NDA, but that's not the same thing as we don't want the public to know about what's going on here. And so that way we can slide it through. But so it talks about basically having water demands and energy demands and making sure it's stopping these big data centers from shifting the electricity costs onto the residents. So that's really the point, is basically they have to pay their full cost of electric service with no hidden subsidies and no like even infrastructure upgrades that are needed. Like those all need to be taken into account, because if it's overloaded because of this one data center and now we all got to pay another $120 a month for the rest of time, that's ridiculous. Right. That's not acceptable. That should be borne by those data centers. But guess what? Now they're going to say, oh, that's fine. We can pay it now because look, we got that subsidy. So we can afford that. Perfect. Okay, fine. I don't care. As long as my bill doesn't go up, do your thing. Like so that's kind of my biggest concern from that. There's also water. And so I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. But basically there's new permitting requirements that they're aiming to protect local water supplies. So especially in Florida, there's things that have been halted for years because they can't figure out what's going to happen with the water. And they literally put in, like, basically Florida is a big sandbar that you build on top of. And so literally there are what they call dry ponds. And so there'll be a 1 acre big hole in the ground that's just with grass. But then when it rains, it fills up for a day or two and then it lowers. And so water control, water protection, it's a big deal, especially in Florida. And so basically they want to say maybe they can use reclaimed water, or there's just different, I know you're going to get into some more of that, but other things are basically keeping authority in zoning and land use decisions, making sure that cities and counties keep that authority. So in other words, people are trying to say, like, because if I go and I want to build, if I bought this land here and it's zoned for residential housing, but I want to go build a big mall there, I have to get approval from the city and county governments. But what they're trying to do is basically the federal government says, no, this is a federal priority, so this is what it's going to be. And then the city, it's kind of like this domineering approach, which is not acceptable. And so I also mentioned transparency. So officials are barred from signing NDAs that hide data center plans from the public, which is just, can you believe that? Like that people are doing that? Like that happened in Iowa, where I've talked about this a few times. It's not about data centers. It's about something else where they're using eminent domain to put a CO2 pipeline underground and steal land from farmers. And I mean, just ridiculous. So it's the same kind of concept here, that they're trying to keep that from happening. So this is pretty important. The problem is, though, these kinds of bills, sometimes they can be pushed through, and man, it looks good on that campaign video and we're doing all the right things and we got the right title on the bill. And then you get into the details and there's one little thing that just kind of negates the entire bill. Right. And so, for example, let's strike this NDA thing. We want them to be able to not have competitors coming in. Okay, yeah, strike that. Well, now you have the same problem as the government. Now the companies just need to get the couple of policymakers in and then in their pocket, and then they're good to go. And so, but that's not what we want. They basically say, we want, okay, great, if we want the AI investment, but not at the expense of the households of Floridians. So that's kind of what that's all about. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think it's a good idea? I mean, between the federal versus state regulating, and I mean, how do you guys see that?
My first thought is on the transparency, because I do think it's a good idea for Florida to be, as a state, to get ahead of this, because especially like people don't realize how it's kind of like how corrupt and self-serving I would say even local governments can be with like you have like city councils and stuff like that. They get once you see like the dollar signs and the like wow, we're gonna be the best city council ever because we're gonna bring this new data center into our city or into our district or whatever, or on the state level or whatever it is. It becomes very tempting and very easy for them to say like agree to whatever the massive company is saying. It'll be like, hey, we need this, we need that, we need this land, we need you to you eminent domain and steal this property, take this property or whatever. And they like local politicians. I'm reminded of there's like a Foxconn fiasco up in Wisconsin. I believe it was Wisconsin a few years ago. I don't know where it's at right now, but it was creating this huge hubbub because the local politicians were like trying to get Foxconn to come in and build, this massive manufacturing plant or whatever. And they were just being really shady about it and not the politicians. They were like not communicating with the public, and the public was really upset about it and, wanted information, and they just weren't giving them information. And then they were like, no, we're not going to take anybody's property. It's going to be fine. And then the next thing you know, eminent domain, notices are getting rolled out like crazy. And people are like, the government is forcing me to sell my house. I don't want to sell my house. I've always lived here. And it's like, well, too bad. Eminent domain, we're forcing you to sell your houses. Those are the kinds of things that's like, that are concerning when it comes to these massive companies coming in and building new projects. Not that I'm against building new projects, I'm not, but that's the stuff that's like, if you have the transparency and the public is completely aware of what's happening and when it's going to happen, and there's not politicians that are just like, we're going to do whatever it takes to get this to happen and forget what the public wants. As long as that's not occurring, then usually, it's a good thing for everybody. It does, it puts more money into the area and there's more jobs and people are generally happy, unless you just hate data centers entirely, in which case you're not going to be happy, obviously.
There's got to be a different way to do the regulation, because I think of it this way: how many of us read the agreements on our phones when we upgrade our software? Right. So you can be transparent all day long. Nobody's reading that. So there has to be something different to make sure that the people aren't taken advantage of, and they can keep doing these things. And that's great. We do need transparency. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but it's almost kind of more like well, we told you we were going to do it, and now we're doing it because you didn't read it or not enough people cared. It doesn't matter. And so I don't know. I don't have a good resolution, unfortunately, but I still don't trust any of it. I think that they'll still just do what they want to do, regardless of what people think about it.
Well, that one caveat there, Doug, is that if the bill goes through, that I was saying that the federal priority of building data centers would not override the local community's own regulations. And so there's a little bit of a buffer there for the say with, instead of it just being the federal government saying, hey, we want more data centers, so build them, Florida, hurry up, that there's that if that bill goes through and if people more states do that kind of bill,
if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of conversation that happens behind closed doors, and then we'll see what happens. I don't know, maybe I'm just too much of a skeptic, but
sure. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not going to be stuff done that's not in the public interest, but at least that gives some buffer to, because you can go, it's easier for you to have sway over your local politicians. You can go complain to City Hall and stuff like that or whatever, and you can push for different zoning laws in your local area. And a lot of places probably do. So some places that have stricter, they don't want this kind of stuff built. If that's already in place, it's going to be a lot harder to build close to that area or whatever. So I think a lot of this is going to come down to
this is a good resolution. Let them build it at Disney.
Especially if that one, I don't know anything about that Florida governor candidate. I know nothing about the candidate, so I'm not making a statement about him. But especially if that's on, if that's on the docket right now, if it's between one governor who wants the data centers and another one who doesn't, then the Floridians have a lot of power over whether or not they want this in their state or not. Because if they vote for one versus the other, that's a massive signaling to say like, yeah, we do or we don't want these. But
and there's I listened to a podcast on this, and there's some highlights I wanted to point out on this. But a couple of things they said is power's not getting expensive. It's the system around it that's getting expensive. Because the electric bill, it looks like an energy problem, but it's a capital spending problem. So basically, if they need to increase the capacity for these companies to be able to have this, well, then that bill gets passed on to everybody. So if they install, whatever they need to from a utility standpoint, then that bill goes to everybody. That's kind of like the idea here. And so the fastest part of the electric bill that's growing isn't the electricity, it's the infrastructure around it. Yeah. And that infrastructure needs to be increased because of the increased demand. And so it's not increased demand because of all these new individual home taxpayers, but it's this one company that got a bunch of subsidies that perhaps they could afford because they're increasing the bill over here. And so it's not so straightforward, but it says utilities don't get rewarded for cheaper solutions. They get rewarded for building stuff. So that's kind of what's happening. And so the system doesn't optimize for affordability, it optimizes for asset growth. So that's kind of the idea. And so I think we need to look at this because you have all these utility companies, you have all these big companies with all these teams of attorneys and getting all this stuff pushed through. And you've got these regulators that are trying to do this on a shoestring budget, trying to understand this. And so the state level people definitely need to be moving forward with this stuff. Mm-hmm. If it's going to happen, it needs to happen in the right way. But like you said, they say all along, this is what it's going to be. This is what it's going to be. And then all of a sudden, now it's not that at all. And they're taking the land. And then
it's your bad for not reading the fine print.
Exactly. So yeah, pretty ridiculous. Okay. So I think we should dive into some water stuff here. Reese, I know you had some things, was it water that you wanted to talk about? I can't.
No, let's talk about nuclear power first because we're in the middle of talking about the bill. But we should probably hear a message from our sponsor before we get into that, and then let's dive deep into this nuclear power because I think it is going to potentially, and I'm not saying that there's not going to be any bad side effects from this, but this could potentially solve a lot of the issues with the rising electricity bills that we've been talking about. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Investing can be confusing and scary, but it doesn't have to be. Genesis Gold Group takes the guessing out of the game and guides you on your gold investment journey. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections, kind of like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer high security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there, 100% owned by you. So don't wait to get started. Visit filibustedgold.com today for a free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.
All right. Thank you, Genesis Gold Group, for sponsoring this episode. Doug, if you don't mind taking us back to the larger view, just really fast, if anybody is, I'm going to talk about nuclear power in a very positive way. And I know not everybody is happy about nuclear power. We've done some other episodes on it. So go look at our other episodes or do your own research on this. But I'm coming from what I believe is a very strong argument that nuclear power is the safest, the cheapest, and the cleanest energy source that we have available as humans right now. There are less deaths and accidents per kilowatt of power generated by nuclear power than literally anything else. And there's also less waste. I know somebody was talking about nuclear waste in the chat for some reason. There's less waste generated by nuclear power than literally anything else, including solar power and wind power. Those energy, those that are usually referred to as clean, because they are so inefficient, and even if we max out the theoretical possibilities of how efficient we could create them if our technology got better, they will still be so inefficient and create such a small amount of electricity. The only caveat to that is if we end up putting solar panels out into space, because it's able to generate a lot more energy out in space because you don't have the atmosphere getting in the way of blocking the sun. And that's part of the reason why nuclear panels stink. The problem with those is they all burn out within 40 or 50 years, and then they just fill the landfills, not to mention the enormous amounts of mining that you have to do to produce all the material. And it mainly comes down to the fact that they're really inefficient. You have to put up tons and tons and tons of them, and they produce a tiny, tiny amount of power. And just to give you an example of this, look at France and Germany. So France, a few years ago, decided they were going to go full on into nuclear power, full on. And Germany said, no, nuclear power is dangerous. We're going to go green, but we're going to do it with wind and solar. So this is what happens. France is now producing 70% of their energy through nuclear power, 70%. And they have the cleanest energy production and the least amount of fossil fuel burning and carbon footprint out of any European country. So if you're talking about clean, Talk about safe. They haven't had any disasters with nuclear in France. Their energy is cheaper, up to 35% cheaper than the rest of Europe. Then let's look at Germany. Germany, on the other hand, said, well, we want clean energy. We're going to close down our nuclear power plants and we're going to go wind and solar. So wind and solar are just so bad. They've spent $700 billion on wind and solar. And where are they today? Well, their energy prices are significantly more expensive than France. And also, they're still using fossil fuels to produce 75% of their energy. They've spent $700 billion on wind and solar, and 75% of their energy is still produced by fossil fuels. So they've literally gone in the opposite direction. It's gotten worse because they shut down their nuclear power plants. So they've actually lost clean energy, and their stuff has gotten more expensive, and they're more reliant on other countries. They're not buying stuff from from Russia so much now, but they still are completely reliant on other countries for their energy. So that's my small little tidbit in there for nuclear power is good. I'm going off the assumption that this is a good thing. So a lot of this, the only thing I'm really excited about with the AI data centers is the potential that it could push the United States investment wise in order to have way more nuclear reactors. And then eventually that's going to bring down our energy costs. And the clean, it'll be cleaner than fossil fuels as well. I'm not concerned about global warming or anything like that, but it is still a plus to be cleaner. It's cleaner, it's safer. In some ways, it's more reliable. But so here's how it's happening. So tech companies are actually investing massively in nuclear power right now because they need nuclear power to be able to power these new data centers. Because we talked about we'd had a 4% increase on the energy grid already, and we're going to be going up to an 8% increase on the energy grid to power all these data centers. So they have to have this electricity. They need to get it from somewhere. So one example is the tech companies are starting back up old nuclear reactors, or they're securing contracts with old ones that are going to get shut down, and they're turning them around and saying, okay, don't shut this nuclear reactor down. We are going to buy your energy from it for the next 40 years or so. So like Microsoft struck a deal just last year that actually restarts one of the nuclear reactors on the 3 Mile Island. And then other tech companies, like I said, are striking deals that are buying up the power for from plants that were probably going to get shut down in the next 10 years. But now they have agreements to buy energy from them for the next 20 or 40 years or whatever. So those are not getting shut down now. But there's even cooler than that. And this is the main point that I have, is that they are building new nuclear reactors because of AI. So right now we only have 54 nuclear reactors in 54 plants in the United States, right? But the tech companies are funding all these new startups that are making these advanced, smaller nuclear reactors that are easier to build and cheaper to build. And they're supposed to be up and running by 2030. The first ones are going to be like early 2030s. They're going to be up and running. They're cheaper to build because they're using a new technique. Usually the older ones, the older kind of nuclear power plants, they would use water as a coolant. And when you do that, you have to have the plant pressurized, and which I don't really know all the ins and outs of that, but essentially it's an enormous building project. You have to have these massive silos. It costs so much money to build these things. It's part of why nuclear power is a hard sell, because it's a massive investment up front. But these smaller plants, these new ones that they're building, they are using sodium instead of water as a coolant, and you don't have to have the plant pressurized. And so it's way less building material. It's way cheaper, right? And so the plan is to start building these really small reactors, these newer advanced reactors that are tiny, and then just build them all over the place. And if that happens, we are going to be in an energy like revival. Like we're going to have energy coming out of our ears. We're going to have, so again, it goes back to supply and demand. Right now, the demand for energy because of AI is really high, and the supply is not there. So the prices are going to be really high. But when you raise the demand and it raises the investment, which it is, it's getting all these AIs, getting all these nuclear plants off the ground. Eventually, the supply comes and catches up, and if the supply overtakes the demand, then our energy prices are actually all going to go down. And so that's my hope. That's what I think is going to happen. Now, the critics of this will say, well, right now the nuclear power plants are taking these deals with big tech companies, and they're sending all of their power to the AI data centers, right? They're using up all the power. And so now it's going to make people's bills go up, and you're going to fall back on fossil fuels. But my pushback to that is only the beginning steps, because you have to take time to build more reactors. Because once it's like the solution isn't, well, just stop building the AI data centers. The solution is, okay, let's build these nuclear power plants faster. Because as soon as you get them built, you've got as much energy as you could possibly want. One of these power plants can power nearly 1 million homes. That's one reactor. Nearly 1 million homes can be powered by one of these reactors. So you start building these things all over the country, then, I mean, we're going to have, like I said, we're going to have energy coming out your ears. But that's my rant about nuclear power.
So what's stopping that? What's stopping that from happening? Is it just regulation, or is it the public image of it, or what needs to happen for that to move forward?
So in the past, nuclear power has a massive public image. Purposely was bashed like crazy. Where there was in the earlier like 60s and 70s or whatever, the idea that nuclear power was really, really dangerous and was like the same thing as dangerous as nukes and all that kind of idea. And there have been some like meltdowns and some stuff in the past. The worst of which, like Chernobyl, could literally never ever happen again. When you look into what was happening and like the lack of safety and what was occurred, like the modern day power plants, like any kind of meltdown that could occur is it's so small. And this is when we talk about like how actually non-threatening these things is. The worst disaster we've had recently was that one in Japan, and that was what actually kicked off Germany to start closing all of theirs. And Japan has like looked into it, and they're like, the amount of radiation that went out into the ocean because of the size of the ocean and how big the ocean is. Like the cure for pollution is dilution, is what they say. When if you have a pollution, if it's diluted over enough amount of area, it does nothing. And so once there was a bad radiation spill into the ocean, but once you spread it out across the amount of the area of the ocean that it is spread into, that massive disaster that everybody was scared about in Japan has had almost no effect at all, almost none, right? And again, it's so much safer than the amount of people that like die on oil fields and that kind of thing. So Germany got scared and started shutting all those down because a lot of it goes back to public image of like, this is scary, this is dangerous. Yeah. The people talk about nuclear waste. It's like, well, the waste, what do we do with the waste? But what's crazy is it produces because it's so efficient, it produces so much less waste than any other way of generating electricity. You could literally buy a big plot of land in the desert, right? And the waste it's the best kind of waste that you can have. It's small, it fits in a box, you stick it somewhere, and it's fine, it's contained, it's not going to hurt anybody. You could have a plot of land in the desert. You could power the United States for the next 500 years, and you would make a blip of like a big building in the desert stacked to the top with nuclear waste. And it would compare that to like the landfills that will be filled with wind and solar. As soon as those things break down and they all just go into the landfills, the difference in size is unbelievable. So regulations is a big thing, right? Rise of costs is a big thing. Like I said, it's such a massive investment for the old school nuclear ones that it's a hard buy, but these newer ones are cheaper. And so And honestly, it's crazy because the AI stuff has pushed us away from the global warming propaganda to where it's even made Bill Gates go, yeah, global warming is really not a threat. It's not going to wipe out humanity. Like 3 years after he wrote a book about how it's going to wipe out humanity. So it's just the demand. It's because the tech companies are like, oh yeah, we need this energy to do what we want to do. That has been like, okay, well, we got to invest in it, and that
doesn't help our agenda anymore.
Investment now to actually do it. So,
wow. Well, thanks for that overview. I mean, you mentioned you had an article about water and how it's not really the crisis, or it is.
Yeah, we can talk about water. Doug, you have any thoughts about the nuclear power or anything? And y'all can push back for sure. I mean, I'm not trying to preach you the gospel of nuclear power gospel.
I think that you're right as far as what we have available, and I like your argument is a really good one, and I totally would agree with it if I didn't think that we have something better coming down the pipeline. But that's getting into like speculation territory and things that aren't like really, generally accepted as far as like free energy and all that. And so like, I think that would, if we were to get into the topic of free energy, then that would obliterate the nuclear power stance, period. But because that's not a thing right now, then yeah, you're on it. Like that's what it comes down to. Basically, that really is the cleanest, most efficient energy.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to replace all energy with like tapping into the ether of the planet if that was actually possible. But some people think it's not possible at all, and other people think it's theoretically possible, and I have absolutely no idea. So I'm just going off, like you said, I'm just going off of what is actually readily available that we're already using, that kind of idea. But yeah, to continue the optimism streak, if you want to pull up that water thing, Ryan, this goes over to the water area. And again, I'm not saying that that data centers do not use up water. They do, but I think that this should be able to maybe ease people's mind a little bit. And also, it's actually going to correct some misinformation. So there's already a book that came out that was talking about how awful the data centers are going to be and how they were going to use up all the water that we have, basically. And then the media has taken that and ran with it like crazy, talking about how all the water is going to be guzzled up and how people's water bills are going up and people have their water shut off. I'm gonna actually address all of those, but this is an incredible article that pretty much debunks every single one of those. If you scroll down a little bit, Ryan, it's right there. Is that little tweet there is talking about the fact that this book, Empire of AI, had completely incorrect numbers about the water usage of the data centers. And this guy who's done a lot of the research on it, his name's Andy Maisley. He's now considered like the AI water guy, and he's done so much research debunking all of these claims, and it's absolutely incredible. But let me talk about how much, because the media is doing fear mongering and bad math, and they're throwing out big scary numbers of water. So let's talk about how much water by comparison data centers are actually using. If you actually pull up that, I think you pulled it up in another tab. So this is crazy. So right at the top, you have how much water is used, gallons per day, to grow alfalfa, orchards, corn, and miscellaneous vegetables and soybeans. And it is nearly off the chart up there, over 10,000. Way down in the bottom in the red, that's how much water we're using for data centers right now. Right. And so it's so much less than people think. So in Texas right now, it is 0.005% of the water use in Texas is going to data centers. That's a percent. That's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage. Nationwide, it is currently 0.2% nationwide. Okay. So that's right now. It's like, okay, what if we expand our data centers? So if we triple our data centers, and which is what people are expecting to happen by 2030, right? We're going to have a tripling of our data centers. If we triple our data centers by 2030, all of the data centers in the United States will be using 8% of what golf courses use right now. 8% of the water that, not 8% of the water in the country, 8% of the water that golf courses are currently using in the country. So if you talk about data centers, they're like, oh, don't use ChatGPT because you're using up all the water. If you do one round of golf, you are using up so much exponentially more water. If you visit Las Vegas one time, or even like wear a pair of shoes or eat corn, you are literally using up so much more water than talking to ChatGPT. That is absolutely ridiculous. And then, pull up, and then here's you're talking about some benefits here. Pull up the other one. This is crazy. So, and this again, comparing it to golf courses, this is tax revenue. And this is obviously why politicians are excited about these. The tax revenue per gallon of water used. So golf courses generate, what is that? That's like 5 cents of tax revenue per gallon, right? And data centers are close to $1 per gallon of water used, right? And so they use way, way less, but also they generate a lot more tax revenue. So that's good. And tax revenue is not everything. I'm mainly focusing on the fact that they use way less water. So if you go back to the last one so people can again see how much less water they use. But I just want to talk about some of these crazy, what do you guys think about this? Does this surprise you? Is this different than what you were anticipating? Because I do want to get into some of those claims about people's water bills going up and that kind of stuff. But
this is pretty shocking to me. I guess I hadn't paid as much of attention to the water side of this as the electric side of this. But, the big thing that comes up for me is what in this equation is not equivalent that's not being accounted for. You know what I mean? So like if I say, oh, we use a lot less in this. Yeah, well, we got a lot less people here, or we got a lot less, So if this exponentially increases to the point to where it is like the final state, which I don't know if we'd ever get there, how much is the water then, or is there some scale that we're not accounting for, or scalability, or, that is off, you know what I mean? Because we're just looking at, this is a relatively new thing compared to alfalfa growth, I guess. But
Right.
You know, so that's kind of my big question is what's not being considered that doesn't make it an equal comparison. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And my answer to that is to lean into basically how efficient the data centers are with the water. So one consideration is the data centers, they can use polluted water because they're literally just using the water as a coolant. The other thing is when water
pulls the
gets
heat
too,
out of the Go
when
ahead.
water gets too expensive, so it's not like they're using up all the fresh, clean water. It's like they can use
Reclaimed
water that has been used for agriculture with like artificially created, what do they call it, fertilizers and stuff like that. They can use that, reuse that kind of water when other places can't because they're just using it as a coolant. The other thing is they don't always have to rely on water. When water becomes too expensive in an area, the data centers have other things that they can buy to use as coolant. So it's not like they're entirely reliant on water. So if the price of water goes up in the future, you could even see them switching and moving to a different. But I do want to just point out the fact that basically everything that you do uses up water. Like if you have clothes, if you eat food, if you go to a building, all of those things use water in order for them to run and produce. And what's crazy about data centers is we use data centers already every day, all day long. We're using data centers right now. Anybody watching this video is using a data center. And so the amount of time people spend online and how useful it is and the amount of software productivity that's done, connected to the cloud and all that kind of stuff, for the amount of time you spend online, it's literally one of the least water. There's one of the things you can do that uses up the least amount of water than almost anything else. Like I said, if you go play one round of golf, you're using so much more water. And if we triple the amount of data centers that we have, we're less than 10% of the water usage that's going to be, in golf courses. So I don't think it's going to be an issue personally. There could be something I'm overlooking. I don't think it's going to be an issue. I did want to quickly address some of the false headlines. There's been a lot of talk about people getting their water shut off or prices going up. And this basically comes down to one thing, which is when a data center moves into a smaller community, those smaller communities almost always have outdated water systems, right? And they've got broken pipes and they've got old pipes. They have lead pipes sometimes that they've wanted to replace for decades. And they've wanted to upgrade their water system and they need to, but they don't have the money to do it. And there's not the reason to do it because their community is not about to grow bigger and they know they're not going to have the taxes in order to pay it off. But so what happens when a data center moves into a small community, this is where you get these headlines that say, oh, the data center moved in and my water shut off or my water bill went up. Well, what occurs is that the data centers provide them the investment. Finally, they're like, wow, we have this massive investment coming into our community. Now we can overhaul our water system. And so they do a massive water overhaul system, which they need to because the data center needs so much water. And then that actually ends up benefiting the entire community. And in some cases, the data centers are paying for it. They're footing more of the bill than the community is to actually overhaul the water system, which is something that needed to happen regardless. If the data center didn't come in, eventually the community would have had to bite the bullet and pay for the new water overhaul system anyways. But now they have somebody else who's helping foot the bill and pay for it. So yeah, initially you see water getting shut off temporarily while they're overhauling the system or connecting the data center. And initially you can see a jump in water prices because you have a one-time investment that the city is doing into overhauling it. Then now it's, that they have to pay off. So that you might have an increase in water temporarily, but in your price temporarily, but it's not this idea that the media is sharing. That's like you put a data center somewhere and you just somehow ruin the water supply. It's actually the opposite. Like in many cases, they're actually helping to increase access to water because the massive investment is allowing local communities to overhaul their water systems, their old outdated ones. So that's the last of my findings. And I just think it's worth to point out because you can get really negative when you talk about a lot of this stuff. And I think it's worth pointing out that sometimes it can be pretty overblown and there are some positives that can come from it.
Wow. That's, those are some pretty critical things that you pointed out. I mean, I wasn't aware of those. So that's why it's so important for us to be informed about these things. And, all of that could be true, but at the same time, then now the other stuff and the not having transparency and all that is the infrastructure and all being upgraded. Like that's interesting about the infrastructure upgrades. Like that should be the case then, that they should need to pay for that, but I think that's fantastic. Well, any other thoughts on that before we go to our final topic of quantum computing?
No,
I think
let's jump
I
into
think we can dive right in. Well, if you guys understand quantum computing, go ahead and let us know in the notes here. I'm going to give you a 1 minute primer on it because I do not understand it, but this is how I like to think about it. So if you think about traditionally, when you think about computers, you think of bits, which is 0 and 1, and you can only have a 0 or 1 at one time. It's binary, this or that. And when it comes to quantum computing, it's basically faster processing because it doesn't have binary bits, 0 and 1. It has qubits, which can exist in quantum bits, can exist in multiple states simultaneously. And so that means they have exponentially faster speeds to do specific tasks. And then there's other thing called superposition, which is what allows that parallel processing. So it's not this, lines of code. If you ever see that, like the zeros and ones, one thing at a time, one step at a time, it's all these things happening simultaneously in parallel. And then there's another concept called entanglement, which is where these qubits, these bits, multi-bits, the quantum bits are actually linked together, which means the state of one qubit depends on another, and even when they're separated, and that's that quantum entanglement idea. And so that allows for faster, more complex calculations. And so if that helps you understand it, good, then you understand it more than I do probably. But that's basically, it's faster processing than a standard computer. It's than classical computing. So
the worst thing about trying to understand quantum computing, which I'm sure we're going to get into if we're actually doing this yet or not, because I tend to think these things are theoretical, but I'm sure we actually are starting it. The worst thing about trying to understand it is you have to understand something about quantum physics before you can. Yeah. And that is literally one of the most confusing things ever. I understand nothing about quantum physics, or next to nothing. So jumping from not knowing about quantum physics to then being like, here's a quantum computer, you're already blowing my brain. But I'm holding on by a thread here because I understand like this much about quantum physics.
I literally was looking for there's this thing called quantum mechanical phenomena. So that's what it's using. Like you said, these things that physics is discovering, and they're able to use this. And I kept looking for this like easy definition, quick explanation, and they all were just word salad. Like I'm sure it makes sense to all the people who have 4 PhDs in physics, but the best way I could do is to describe these 4 independent principles, or 3 independent things that come together that I just described. And that's kind of how it works. Instead of zeros and ones, it can, anyway. So
I think you did a fantastic job describing that, Ryan. It was a really good, like, side-by-side comparison that you did. I mean, there's obviously more complex things within that, but the basics that you gave for like a quick little breakdown, I thought that was great. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I know, Doug, you've got something that you would like to share on this. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, or do you want to jump into what you?
Yeah, I want to know how this connects to the data centers. This connects.
Yeah,
to
that's
AI?
what I'm about to do for you. We're gonna connect some dots here. But the quantum computing, like you suggested, Reese, that it was a theory, and you also suggested that it might not be. That is accurate. It is becoming no longer a theory. Quantum computing is going to be here as early as 2030, which is an interesting date because even what one of you guys mentioned that date earlier about
the new kind of nuclear power plants are supposed to be up and running by that time.
So in tandem with that, I actually only have more good news on how this is all going to work out in a way that's not going to just completely obliterate our power bills. So quantum computing is only going to make AI more efficient and faster, because right now all of AI is running on your regular like GPU system, just regular computers, which is a much more simple process than what quantum computing is. The problem with quantum computing is that you have to have extremely low and controlled and low temperature controlled environments in order to have a quantum computer. So they have they're making quantum computers right now, or a big one, and it's kind of like, how back in the day we used to see those old videos of how the first computers came out and they had like the huge room and it was like one computer and it was this big room. We're at that point again, but with quantum computing. And so the crazy thing about what's happening with this is once we have quantum computing, it will make it so that AI on regular computer grids, like what we're going to have over here, will use significantly less energy, and will use significantly less resources. So even less water, even less power, it won't do nearly as much because quantum computing is going to be providing the source for the AI infrastructure that's coming in. Remember that Trump brought in hundreds of millions of dollars to the country for AI infrastructure. Part of that, a large part of that, I had something pulled up here, an article over here somewhere, but now my computer's lagging. But the actual numbers of how much money was going into specifically the quantum part of that. So this is not like they wouldn't put this much money into a theory. This is something that's actually happening. And of course, Microsoft has their hands in it too. But here's one. Microsoft has unveiled a new chip called Majorana 1 that says it will enable the creation of quantum computers able to solve meaningful industrial scale problems in years, not decades. They're looking at this like within the next decade, obviously. Like this article was posted 2025. So that's got to be, before 2035, if that's accurate, which suggests 2030.
I didn't realize that some of that massive government infrastructure investment was going to quantum computing, because I heard a little bit about quantum computing, and that makes sense because that's what the amount of data centers that we're building, all those things, is they're planning on having so much resources for AI that it's like they have to have something like this. They need a new kind of computer in the same way they need a new kind of energy grid, like with the nuclear power. They need new kinds of advanced resources in order to power this thing, in order to power like the AI god that they're trying to build, basically. Like you gotta really have some major resources. So that's fascinating that they're pouring that much money into.
I got the article pulled up finally. So it says here, the funding part of the Trump administration's $4.8 trillion budget proposal would direct more money for AI research to the Defense Department and the National Science Foundation. The administration also wants to spend $25 million on what it calls a national quantum internet, a network of machines designed to make it much harder to intercept digital communication. So this is the problem that we're going to have eventually, though, with quantum is how sensitive it is, because literally the tiniest little thing could knock quantum computing out of whack and make it not work. And so I've got a resolution that is going to blow your guys' minds on how this is going to actually work and how we're going to be able to power these systems with whatever massive quantum computer we end up having. And that is Greenland.
That is awesome.
I am not even joking. And I'm not the first person to think of this either. I found a few articles on this, people saying like, what if, what if we actually need Greenland because we need a massive underground base for the quantum computer
on top of the world.
And it's already cold up in Greenland, so that would be putting it in the Arctic if it needs to be constantly cold, and also
way to go,
the environment not changing. Putting it in the Arctic would make perfect sense.
Wow. And so they've already I didn't know about this. If you guys heard of Project Iceworm?
No.
It's this project back in the 50s that happened where the United States government drilled holes in Greenland, like large tunnels for the Cold War. They were prepping for nuclear war with the Soviets and all that, and they drilled holes in Greenland to be able to store all their nuclear warheads and stuff. So it's definitely a thing. Like, we've already been over there, and we already have an underground base there. Of course, that specific one has been shut down because it's got a bunch of nuclear waste in it. But the point is that we can have underground bases. So if you have an underground base, you have in Greenland, you have a few things. You have the temperature, right? The extremely low temperature. Greenland is one of like the top 10, or parts of Greenland are one of the top 10 coldest places on Earth, which includes places like Antarctica and Russia, And then on top of that, if you build it underground, which wouldn't be the most surprising way to go about it, you would have the protection from the EMFs and every other sort of radioactive element that could possibly contaminate the area. And then because it's so cold there, it's not like you're going to have a lot of activity there as far as anybody moving in and building cities on top of it. So it's really this perfect little frozen paradise for the quantum computer. And then what you do is you connect this quantum computer to the underwater transatlantic cables that already exist and can already connect directly to all of the power systems over here in the US or wherever it needs to go. And it's kind of like this, you can think of it like a queen bee, you know, with its little workers that go out. So we'll still have the regular computers that run, but they're running more efficiently because of the quantum computing that's backing this entire AI infrastructure in the United States. And Trump has already said we are the #1 AI leader in the world, and we're going to become that because of doing something like this. And we need Greenland for that. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Dude, that is awesome. Well done.
Interesting connection there.
You know, if you think about though, like, I mean, look, if you're going to make, just think about the concepts of in parallel versus sequentially, like even in like manufacturing, or if you're cooking dinner, right? If you cook, okay, I got to chop this, I got to chop that, and then I put it in there and get the meat ready, and then I get this ready, the noodles and all this other stuff. If you do all those one at a time, you're going to be eating dinner at midnight, right?
Right.
But if you do all of it in parallel, like this is cooking, that's boiling, okay, I get this ready, and then you're putting, such a dumb example, but that's the idea of you can eat in 30 minutes then, right? Instead of 3 hours. And so it's the same concept. And if you have a competitor that has to try and break down your encryption using a sequential binary thing, and your encryption is a quantum thing that's entangled and all over it's like having a 3D spreadsheet instead of just an Excel spreadsheet with rows, and, you know, it's like not infinite, but, you know, so it's just incredible. But I mean, thinking about that from even a national security and defense, and with Greenland, and
even the Golden Dome, they're going to start that in Greenland too. That's what I've been reading, is the Golden Dome is going to be basically in Greenland once we really take control of it. And it's got all kinds of applications that are just they only benefit the United States. That's why, like, people get so upset about Greenland. And honestly, I don't understand the argument against being more in control of Greenland. And it's for reasons like this. It's national security, it's efficiency, it's like
technology dominance, everything.
Yep.
It's like there's no.
That's what this means. That's why Greenland is so important. Yeah. And if China gets it, or if Russia gets it, guess what? We're going to turn into a third world country. That's what's about to happen
very quickly. Yeah. Wow. Well, we're over an hour. Do you guys have any final thoughts before we wrap up here? AI data centers, water
I was not expecting the data
bills,
centers to connect to Greenland. That's for sure. But that would be fascinating. It is crazy because it does make you think about what we're currently building data center wise, because if we do get to quantum computing realistically in the next 10 years or so, then it could mean that the data centers we're building now won't really be up to par anymore, right? And then they're going to want to replace those with quantum ones. So that's kind of an interesting thought. But I feel like you probably will still have a lot of regular computing that you need to where they'll still probably be needed and be in use for different things. But I think the quantum computing that's another level of technology that we haven't seen yet, that, like, if it really does work out the way they're saying, there's going to be some major changes to the infrastructure again that you're going to see, whether it's like we've got a huge base in Greenland now that's powering that, or whatever it's going to be. So that'll be fascinating to watch. So that's my only thoughts, is like what that's going to look like. We're already seeing massive changes now to the infrastructure because of what,
I have a feeling
of AI, with the nuclear power plants and the new data centers or whatever. So it's, but the good thing about quantum computing is that it'll allow us to do that with less resources. And I think that's the positive. It's like less resources, less computing power, less data centers. We don't have to build as many of these to do the same amount. So that's always a plus. But
yeah. And I think that I would assume that they have been building these data centers and with this in mind. I would be surprised if these massive companies had no idea that this was coming. You know what I mean? Like, so even if it's not perfectly ready, it might be an easy transition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. And Google, I know they have a chip. I mean, I watch these other AI news and things, and they're talking about this as like it's going to eclipse AI, or actually AI won't survive without it because it has an upper limit on processing power. And even Google has a quantum chip, I think, that's solved in minutes what it would take a classical computer 10 septillion years. So figure out how many zeros that is, But I mean, that's the kind of processing power that we're talking about. getting into this. And so this has been, we've covered a lot of stuff here, but we definitely need to be informed on this. We need to know what your state is doing. Reach out to your legislators, tell them what you want done, that you want transparency, that you want this done the right way, that you want the financial burden put on the data centers, not on us, the citizens, and make sure you're informed with what's going on. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. God bless.
Gold is not just a backup plan if the world falls apart. It's an investment opportunity that could set you up for generations. There's never really a bad time to invest in gold, but you want to make sure you have the right guide. And that is where Genesis Gold Group shines. Whether you are a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, their trusted expertise and competitive pricing makes them an easy choice. They offer tangible assets in case of emergencies, but they can also design the perfect IRA just for you. And they'll even cut through all that confusing red tape from the IRS. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer a more high-security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there and 100% owned by you. Genesis Gold Group is a safe, simple, and convenient way to invest. Visit filibustedgold.com today for your free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.